Good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network's BRN Sunday Podcast. I'm Jeff Snyder, your host, and I'm going to be taking you around the globe to discuss the issues related to retirement, markets, technology, personal finance, and so much more. We've got a great group of contributors chopping at the bit to discuss these issues and so much more. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. Hope you enjoyed your time off with friends and family. So let's sit back and enjoy this episode of BRN Sunday. Let's kick things off with a look at the latest social media trends. And joining me back from recent trips to Bangalore, India, and London, England for about 2 weeks, Devin Banerjee, Senior Financial Services Editor from LinkedIn. Devin, welcome back to the States.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. I'm sorry to have missed the podcast for a couple of weeks, but glad to be back.
Yeah, we're glad you enjoyed your trip. I know you got to see some of your colleagues in those respective countries. That must have been really neat because, I would imagine LinkedIn with 650 million subscribers is popular in all parts of the globe. So that must have been really interesting to hear different perspectives and cultures in India in particular.
Yeah, that's correct. Our user base, or our members, as we call them, are in more than 200 countries, so basically everywhere. And my team, the editorial team, is growing very rapidly. So I went to spend some time with some of our new team members.
Very cool. So you're back in the States and adjusting to the time changes. Have you had a chance to, kind of look through the latest trends, and do you have any for us today?
Yeah, absolutely. Even though it's a holiday week, or it was this past week, Thanksgiving week, we still had a lot of really popular conversations going on the platform. The first one was about how the tech industry, which I happen to be in, is now becoming a hotbed for unionizing, which is kind of ironic, maybe because the tech industry is often, portrayed as a very fun, employee-friendly industry to work in, but some of the big companies, Google especially, has been in the news. Google recently, it was reported, hired an anti-union consulting firm to help it figure out how to kind of bust efforts among its employees to unionize. So this has been quite interesting, and we saw a really passionate conversation unfold on the platform among HR professionals, among workers in technology. And it's really kind of opening a crack in the tech model. So a couple of big factors here. And again, this is mostly among the big tech companies. The first factor is that, these big tech companies now are really actually utilizing a lot of contractors. So these are employees these are roles that don't carry the full suite of benefits that full-time regular employees have. In the tech sector, especially those lavish benefits that the full-timers have. So that's starting to create this divide of the haves and have-nots, which is very dangerous in any kind of employee-employer situation. The other big trend is on the other end of the spectrum, some of these gig economy companies. So companies that utilize workers who are kind of part-time, or in the case of these rideshare companies, they're not even contractors. They're kind of independent contractors who just use the app, and that's really stripping workers of rights and benefits as well. And we see those types of workers coming together to try to fight back against this have and have not dynamic. So this is really, as I said, changing the image and the dynamic here in Silicon Valley and in other places where there are a lot of tech companies, because that image, as I said before, of very employee-friendly benefits and environment is really changing. So that was a very interesting conversation this week.
Yeah, and I did read an article, I think it was this morning, that 4 Google employees were fired
I saw that, yeah.
For I guess, coordinating. I don't know what you call it. Organizing, I guess, is what the right term is. And they were fired. I guess they used other rationales, like they weren't doing their job or they were, I don't know, whatever. Yeah, so it is certainly interesting. I wonder, you mentioned some of the perks that you get when you're an employee versus not an employee or a contractor. obviously in most collectively bargained situations, there's in a lot of them, I should say, there are defined benefit plans, and I'm wondering if that is part of the plan for if they were to collectively bargain. Would there be a defined benefit plan? Would there be, what would be some of the benefit options that would be available to these individuals? I know that's to come, but really interesting, and
Yeah.
I would not have expected that in tech. Just I guess based on my own, prejudices, I guess.
Right. No, absolutely. And actually, among all the benefits, there are obviously some more fun ones like time off and stuff like that. But there are also some related to money, as you said, mostly defined contribution, matching schemes and stuff like that from the employer. Also,
Right.
stock options or stock grants. Those are really leaving out, contractors and especially independent contractors. So it's a lot related to money, of course.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, do you see, just based on what you're seeing in the chatter in your threads, do you think that this is something that ultimately will, because there's obviously as you mentioned, that someone hired a union busting consulting firm, which I didn't even know such a thing existed. But do you see this kind of playing out where we actually do get collectively bargained tech workers?
I think what's interesting is as we approach 2020, some of the Democratic candidates for president have brought this up in that larger conversation of, do big tech companies have too much power? Now, most of that conversation is around
data,
monopoly power and market influence and data, absolutely, data and customers. But we're starting to hear them talk more about, especially these stories about contractors, which have really, I've been seeing them a lot, about how much of the workforce at these big tech companies are contractors without full benefits. So we're starting to hear that more from the candidates. So there could be a policy and a regulatory angle that comes into play in the next year. Absolutely.
Yeah, and from my recollection, having worked with multi-employer plans, the private sector collectively bargain groups have really shrunk over the years, so it has not seen tremendous growth. This would be kind of a reversal of some of that trend, I would think.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think
Sorry,
so, yeah.
Didn't mean to take you off your thought. What else is top of mind?
No, I'm glad we spent some time on that. It's an important topic, and it's really being talked a lot here in Silicon Valley. But another trend and conversation that really took off this week was about a drop in charity donations around this holiday season, and it kind of played into some larger trends that the Washington Post pointed out in a really interesting story. So we're seeing food banks and charities experiencing quite a steep decline in donations in recent times. And we're seeing this around the nation, as a matter of fact. So Americans giving to charities fell about 1% in the past year. And the author of this report, it's a Giving USA report, estimated that about 2/3 of U.S. households used to donate annually before the Great Recession, 2/3, and now only just over half, only about 55% do. So that's quite a steep drop over the past decade. And some of the driving factors being pointed to here, one which I thought was really interesting, is actually the change in the tax code just about 18 months ago, which doubled that standard deduction for charitable giving. So some people, so you have to kind of give 2 times as much as you used to start to get that deduction. So that's kind of a smaller factor. Others cite just this generational shift where kind of culturally, older generations were more inclined to give, and it used to be just more a part of their annual routine, and we're seeing that less among earning and spending generations now. So this has some wide implications. Obviously, I mean, so many important institutions rely in part or in large part on charitable giving, and this could be quite a permanent trend.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think that the American people are very charitable, so it surprises me. And I have read some of these articles where the charitable donations have fallen. A lot of people do go back to the tax code changes, which obviously have some level of an impact. And I wonder how much of
Yeah.
it, Devin, is related to just wages and availability. I mean, we're on this show we talk about retirement and other benefits, and those eat up. If you're asking people to save, how much can you put away or give to charity, right? I mean, there's only so much of the pie that you can carve up, and I wonder how much of that is due to these other things that are out of people's control, like wages.
That's absolutely true. I mean, we talk all the time, Jeff, you and I, about wages kind of stagnant today in the U.S. We talk about, the younger generations starting to realize that they have not been saving and, of course, not investing as well enough for their futures. And so, yeah, I think giving charitably probably just falls far down that list of priorities among the current generation. So a bit sad, but we'll see where that trend takes us.
But people, just real quick before, I don't mean to interrupt you, Devin, but just one quick point. People can not only donate money, but they can also donate their time, right? They can go serve in a soup kitchen. When I went to school, we had to do community service, and you can still do that if you don't have the means. You can find ways to, you could wrap gifts, you could organize for a charitable organization. I'm sure that many of those organizations are understaffed and would need help. So I think people can donate in other ways if they don't have the disposable income. Sorry, Devin.
That is a fantastic point, especially around this time of year. I would, if you can pull out one takeaway from your entire podcast this week, I would encourage that you do that.
Yep.
I'm a big fan of that point.
Absolutely.
So one final item I'll mention, because this I found really interesting, and it actually sparked quite a cool conversation, is that the OECD, that's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, so this intergovernmental research group that usually sticks to economic growth forecasts and stuff like that, it actually had this really fascinating report about a week ago that said, more than trade issues and low corporate investment and fiscal spending issues, some of the biggest threats to world growth now include climate change and rapid technological change. So this is the first time the OECD has kind of expanded its pool of factors or attributes or variables that go into global growth to include climate change and technology. And so I just thought that was super interesting, and something let's talk about more on future pods, because I think those two issues, we're seeing a lot more, especially in the finance and investment management space, a lot more talk and action actually around incorporating climate change projections into macro investment theses and even some micro ones. So definitely a topic that I'll be talking about more with you going forward.
Yeah, and I did see an article where central banks around the world were going to include this in their, I want to say vetting. I'm not looking at the article, but they're in their vetting of some of these banks and other, to see what their ESG, what type of social governance and environmental impacts. So I think it kind of follows in line with what you're describing with the OECD.
I think that's right. The San Francisco Fed actually, for the first time among the Fed system, in October, I believe, held a full day conference or 2-day conference about climate change and its impact on global economic growth going forward. So I think we'll just see a lot more of those type of forums going forward.
Yeah, this is a huge topic. We've covered it on the network in a lot of different ways. So looking forward to hearing your perspective, and especially the readers and contributors on LinkedIn, because obviously that's a huge forum there. Very important conversation piece. Well, Devin, it's always great to hear your voice. So glad that you're back from your travels. And I think that's your last trip for the year? Work trip?
I'll be in New York next week, but that's just become a standard monthly trip for me. So last big trip of the year.
Yeah, last big trip of the year. Well, Devin, always a pleasure talking with you, and we'll see you later on, tomorrow on the network, and looking forward to that as well. So until then, have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good, Jeff. Take care.
Bye-bye. Welcome back. And now we're going to talk a little technology. You know, we just had Black Friday. We just had Thanksgiving. And who better to talk about all of the above? Daniel Klein, Senior Technology and Consumer Products Reporter with The Motley Fool, just returning from a vacation, Thanksgiving vacation. Hi, Daniel. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well. So you want to give us a skinny on your vacation, what that was like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I went, took my son. My wife doesn't like to travel so much. We went on a 5-day cruise to Labadee, Haiti, which is not what I expected. I thought it was going to be your typical sort of cruise ship island, which is just sand and, drinks and whatnot. Instead, it's this just amazingly beautiful, like, I can't even do it justice with pictures. Just like looking at it, you're like, the greenest place I've ever seen, and just, beautiful beaches and, and silly things. We did an inflatable water park and played with kayaks and that kind of stuff. But yeah, a lovely, I'd say relaxing, but I was up till 2 a.m. every night. So not necessarily relaxing, but a very good time.
Well, good for you, and glad to have you back on the show. Thanks so much for making time on this Friday morning. I know you were exceptionally busy. So let's just jump right in. I mean, we just had Black Friday. We have Cyber Monday tomorrow when this show airs. But what's top of mind for you and the folks over at The Motley Fool?
Yeah, so if we're going to talk about Black Friday, one of the questions I get asked all the time is, how do I know when to buy? Should I wait for Cyber Monday? Are prices going to be lower on December 23rd? And the reality is, what you should do is know what the regular price of an item is. Now, that's a little tricky if you haven't already done that research, but hopefully, if you have your eye on a TV or a refrigerator or whatever it is, you knew, okay, that was a $600 TV a month ago. Mm-hmm. And if you see it for $350, the reality is buy it, because that's a really good deal. And then maybe for the next month, if they have a price matching guarantee, track it. And if they don't, just forget about it and accept that you've saved as much money as you're going to save, and that has to be good enough. If you don't care what you buy and you just want a TV, well, yes, maybe wait until December 23rd and you can buy a Sony or a Panasonic and some brand you've never heard of, and it will technically be a TV and it will be inexpensive. But really, Black Friday has become a concept more than a day. I mean, this afternoon, if you drive by, or we're taping this on a Friday, if you drive by, you're going to see there will be crowds, but there won't be pandemonium. My wife and I are planning to go to Target. We probably won't buy anything, just to look around. And I'm not expecting it to be chaos, really.
And do you think that, what's your expectation? I mean, in addition to being a consumer products and technology reporter, you often write about companies. We've talked on the show about JCPenney and Sears and other Toys R Us as examples. But what's your gut tell you right now? I mean, it's very early on a Friday as we're talking, but what's your gut tell you about retail sales in brick and mortar stores? I mean, are they going to get in the black this year, or is this going to be a struggle?
So the rich will get richer. Mm-hmm. If you look at the balance sheets for, JCPenney would be a big example. They're losing billions of dollars, losses accelerate, store closures accelerate, and one of the successes they touted was cutting their inventory. Mm-hmm. Now, I understand you want to properly manage your inventory, but the one time of year you want to be chock full of inventory is now. Yeah. You can't sell it if you don't have it. We've talked about, I used to run a toy store, and we planned Christmas starting the previous Christmas. Some of your orders had to go in January and February, Lego specifically. You had to make a bet on what you were going to get. And yes, you could fill some things in. We had suppliers we could get train sets from on short notice. But if you ran out of the hot Model RC car, that's it. You didn't have any more. So if you're a JCPenney, you bet 6 months ago, I'm not going to do that well during the season, and I'm just going to try to survive. And I think that's going to be the case of most of the struggling retailers. What's going to be interesting is the retailers that are sort of on the fence. Kohl's, Macy's, those are both doing okay. They're profitable. They've made some good moves. But I think this holiday season will be a referendum on whether they're actually going to make it or not.
And it's interesting you brought up remote control cars, and you and I are both old enough to remember the It toys, right? The Cabbage Patch, the American Girl doll. Are there It toys? The Tickle Me Elmo, wasn't that one where you tickled him and he and that was, everyone wanted that. Is there an it toy? Are there still it toys or it products?
So there absolutely are. That tends to be a younger kid thing now.
Okay.
And at the moment, there's maybe 10 or 15 toys that are very hot. So you're not getting that. If we don't get there to get a Cabbage Patch Kid, you're going to have to beat someone up or pay $500 or whatever it is. Supplies are generally pretty good. And one of the things, so when I ran a toy store, we did not sell the traditional toy store products. We were a specialty toy store, much higher end games and radio control and model trains. But people would ask me about, I think it was Zuzu Pets, the little hamsters that were very popular. And I would tell them, just wait till January 2nd. Tell your kid you're going to get this. You're just not going to get it till after Christmas because it is not worth the stress of getting up at 4 a.m. to wait in line at Target, to maybe not get it, to pay too much for it, when the reality is any shortage is generally very short-lived.
Yeah, let me ask you about Star Wars, because we've got a movie coming out December 20th, I think, is the last in the Skywalker set.
I have my tickets.
Okay, well, you have your tickets, and we'll probably talk about that as we get closer. I do not have my tickets, by the way, but would you expect Star Wars merchandise? It was big when we were kids. I used to remember going to the Line Out Kitty City in Baltimore to pick up my Ben Kenobi figure. Star Wars merchandise still big this time of year, and are they already promoting Rise of Skywalker toys?
So they are promoting it, but they're somewhat limited in what they've released because there are probably spoilers in some of the toy sets. That's actually one of the ways people learn stuff about the movies is toys will get released in other markets and they'll see like, oh my God, C-3PO has a red arm. What does that mean? Like, is that in the movie? Is that... but there's actually sort of a hidden surprise toy. We've talked about Disney Plus a lot, and the hit show on there is The Mandalorian.
Mm-hmm.
And without giving away too much of the show, we're 4 episodes in, and this happened in the first episode, so I think it's fair to say that this small thing isn't a spoiler. There is a 50-year-old baby of the same species as Yoda. They don't really explain that, but when you see it, you say, oh, baby Yoda. And Baby Yoda, they were not expecting to be a merchandise darling, so they are struggling very much like when Frozen first hit, and they didn't know the level of success it was going to be. So there's sort of a shortage of Baby Yoda simply because they weren't planning an awful lot of merchandise, and people are demanding it.
Yeah, and by the way, I know you and I have traded emails offline. I actually did wind up signing up for Disney Plus. It actually takes me back to some of my childhood. But I do actually like The Mandalorian, so I stuck with it, and I think it's a great show, and I love little baby Yoda. He in some way reminds me of my black cat, or Jody and I's black cat, Sebastian, who I oftentimes, really his ears go out, makes me think of Yoda. So Daniel, what else is top of mind this week? I know you're going to be on the network later on Tuesday, but what else is top of mind for you in terms of tech?
So it was a really interesting thing that happened with Twitter this week. Twitter came out and said, if your account has been inactive for a period of time, we are going to disconnect it and free up those user handles. That's something the phone company does periodically. If a phone number hasn't been used, it gets recycled in. License plates. The problem is people keep their loved ones' Twitter and Facebook accounts up as sort of a memorial. Mm-hmm. So, I think we've all woken up to a Facebook or Twitter feed where someone you knew was sick, it's their spouse types like, I'm sorry to report that so-and-so passed away. Here is the memorial information, because that's the easiest way to communicate with their friends. And a lot of people, just like you don't delete the last voicemail message from a loved one, they wanted to keep those. And what would have happened is Twitter would have been getting rid of them. And now Twitter has reversed course, which is something social media companies are not great at doing. And they've come back and said, hey, look, we hear you. What we'll do is we're going to keep these up until we can figure out a way to create memorial accounts, which maybe won't use those handles, but will keep that information, those pictures, those jokes, whatever it is, those inappropriate posts, keep those up for perpetuity for family and loved ones. So it's just a rare case of a company sort of hearing its audience, and its audience had a pretty reasonable objection, even though I'm sure there's lots of great Twitter handles. Follow me at Worst Ideas. A lot of great Twitter handles out there that are tied up.
Yeah, and I was going to, digital assets. That's a big part now of estate planning. I've been reading a lot, carrying the articles on the Morning Pulse. that is really a big part of that, and it probably has something to do in some level with Twitter's reversal. I mean, I can, I can understand. I really don't understand the rationale, by the way, to pull those not unused accounts down. I mean, what difference does it make? It pads Twitter's numbers. I mean, we're going to pass on. I mean, I don't know. Does that really take up a lot of server space, Stan?
No, it's not server space. It was about freeing up the handles, and it's not necessarily the names, but let's say you're at biggest pizza fan. Well, that would be a valuable moniker somebody else would want. So there's definitely a way to sort of keep up that legacy, but also let people use it. But I think what you're going to see is you talk about digital assets. And if you remember in the early days of the internet, there was a gold rush for URLs.
Yep.
And companies with an established trademark could go after the URL if they didn't own it. But if I was legitimately Daniel Microsoft and I somehow registered Microsoft.com and was using it, the company didn't actually have a claim. And that's a problem with Twitter because there are sort of all sorts of different ways of tackling handles and who should own it. And if I get your name and you're a public figure and I use it as a parody account of you and you have to get at Jeffrey Snyder, the real guy, or like whatever it is, it can be a problem, especially when you have a very famous person who wants to use, a common name, but a regular person is using it in a regular way. And there's a challenge because if they can argue that they're representing themselves one way, they can go after you in court. So we are going to see verification and digital property rights become a much bigger thing, especially as we see, these poor companies that have to register hundreds of URLs because of all the domain names and all the different things you can do now.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because I read an article this morning about a private equity firm is buying up all of the .org domain names.
There's been all sorts of strategies like this. I mean, I remember for years I paid whatever the minimum was to keep AOL because I had both Dan Klein at AOL, D Klein at AOL, and those seemed like sort of valuable assets. And now, of course, at some point, AOL itself became a mark of shame, and it wouldn't matter if I had Dan at AOL.com. You still wouldn't want to tell people that was your email address. So, it's all going to be complicated. And .org was supposed to be for nonprofits, just like .edu is supposed to be. So you may see tougher standards. You might see some challenges in court. There's also a global aspect to this where one country doesn't necessarily agree with another. It's less of a Wild West, but it's still absolutely a Wild West.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dan, I want to thank you very much for coming on the program today. And know you just got back from your trip. And look forward to having you on the TV network on Tuesday in our Technology Tuesday segment. So thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we will talk with you soon.
I'll see you then.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Welcome back, and really privileged to be joined by one of the original co-hosts with me of what was the Weekly Pulse. And George Grombacher is the Chief Community Officer for Money Alignment Academy, and he is also the host of the Money Savage podcast, which is how we originally met. George, happy Thanksgiving to you and your family.
Well, thanks, Jeff, and always happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm always happy to be here as well, and great to hear your voice. And you obviously always bring a great perspective, not only about money, but about life, and one of the things I really enjoy about you. So. What's top of mind for you this week as you're recording your show, as you're out there talking to plan sponsors, and you're doing the Money Alignment Academy? What's top of mind?
Yeah, well, I think you hit the nail on the head with perspective. And for me, perspective is such an important thing. I think that how you look at something makes all the difference. And you think about that in terms of if you're a perfectionist and every time you look at a situation and you only notice the flaws, I think that that's not necessarily a good thing. And it really bleeds over into everything. I think it's so important to get a sense of where you are and think about it in terms of maybe you're not thrilled with the house you're living in, the car you're driving, your life in general. Maybe you're not happy with your football team, whatever it might be. I think it's such an important thing and easy to do this time of year to take a big step back and really think about and be thankful for all the awesome things that we have that so many other people across the world do not have.
Yeah, and I think you make some really great points, and it's always this time of year, post Thanksgiving, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, trying to get those gifts, trying to compress, the work schedule is reduced because you've got holidays in there, really causes people to get amped up, and you bring up perspective, George, and I've been doing a lot of studying and reading about the universe, and our universe is 14.5 billion years old, and our planet is about 4.5 billion years old. And if you look at all of human history, I think if you were to put it in terms of minutes, it would probably represent 1 minute of time. So I mean, if that just doesn't put things in perspective, I mean, it's just we are so small, a sliver of time, and you have our time on this planet is very finite. So I think you make some really astute points there.
Yeah, I think it's fun to really break things down like that, and to get a sense of our place in history and time. And then you think about it that like 6 billion people in the world live on less than $3 a day.
Yeah,
which is pretty extraordinary. So if you're making $30,000 a year, you are in the 1% of all the people in the world. So super easy to get caught up. And especially today when we're talking about, or rather the politicians are talking about billionaire taxes and the billionaire class and this, that, and the other thing. And whatever side of the political aisle you are on, we have it really good here in the United States. We essentially won the lottery by being born here or living here. If you've got two parents, that you're a very fortunate person. If you've got one parent, you're a very fortunate person. So, if you're not totally thrilled, I 100% get it. I encourage people to strive and work to improve your situation, but keep things in perspective. Put yourself in the shoes of somebody who perhaps was coming from a war-torn country where there was no freedom, there was no infrastructure, no opportunities to do the things that you and I do every day, and then to have that person step into your shoes in your situation right now. Yeah. And I don't think it's too preachy to be doing that. Just think about it.
Yeah, I don't think it's preachy. It's just a sense of perspective is really important. Now, George, Thanksgiving is often a time of leftovers, and so many of our listeners may have some leftover stuffing, which I absolutely, carbs are my favorite. They may have some leftover turkey, but I know you have some thoughts about leftovers.
Yeah. I think that leftovers are great for a couple of days. Like you said, I'm down for a turkey omelet and a turkey sandwich and heat up the turkey or whatever for a couple of days. But after that, I think it's time to really clean out the fridge, get rid of the leftovers. And how that relates to personal finance or modern living or retirement planning, there are constantly people who are trying to put stuff on our plate, who are trying to get those leftovers out of their fridge and put them onto your plate. And it's a never-ending stream of financial information or financial products and people constantly trying to get your attention, get your money, get your resources. And I'm not saying that that's bad, but we have to be good stewards of how it is that or rather what and who we're allowing into our minds. And this is a good time of year, be at the end of the year and then coming into next year with New Year's resolutions and planning for the next year, to be cleaning out our analogous financial junk drawer, and to make sure that maybe I'm not, perhaps you've got some recurring monthly charges or subscriptions that you're not using, just all this junk that gets kind of piled on that we accumulate. It's a good time to go through and do some cleaning, get some of that off your plate.
Yeah, I mean, you're coming down the home stretch here. You've got taxes due at the end of the year, well, in April or possibly October if you choose to file an extension. So there's a lot of things that people can do in terms of cleaning out that closet, so to speak, as you mentioned. And I think people, you do have a responsibility to yourself and to your family to do that. Not just you and I, but listeners, and now's the time to do that. And you may not need that Netflix subscription, or maybe you share it with a friend or a family member, as long as it's legal. or you do other things where, and I think it comes back to perspective, George, and I think you hit the nail on the head. We have it pretty good as long as you're healthy, you're above ground, you've got some level of shelter, you've got sustenance, you're in a pretty good spot, and you don't necessarily need the big screen TV or the latest phone in order to make you happy.
That's 100% true. And just because you're not a Patriots fan or a San Francisco 49ers fan,
or a Ravens fan, or a Ravens fan, because they were pretty good last night too.
It's pretty rough on the rest of us, but keep things in perspective.
Yeah, and a season is only a season, and you can't. You got to define yourself. You can't let those things. And maybe this is just getting older. I don't know, George, but it's just you can't let those other things define you. Work. What defines you is how you define yourself, whether it's a good family person or a charitable person or, something else. So I think you hit the nail on the head.
Amen, brother.
So what are your plans for the rest of the weekend, George?
We've got a lot of family coming into town here in Phoenix. Unfortunately, it's going to rain on Thanksgiving, but I think that's going to be in so many places across the country. So my future has in store beer, wine, overeating, a little bit of football, and hopefully not getting too wet. So.
Absolutely. Well, George, always a pleasure talking with you. He is the Chief Community Officer for Money Alignment Academy, a great friend of the program, great friend of mine. George Grunbacher, always great talking with you. Enjoy the rest of your week and your weekend.
Thanks, Jeff. Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye. Welcome back. Now we're going to shift gears to a little healthcare. And who better to tell us about healthcare, or talk about healthcare, I should say, than Lydia Ramsey. She is a senior healthcare reporter and correspondent with Business Insider. And she's also the editor of the weekly newsletter Dispensed, coming out from Business Insider as well. Hi, Lydia. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming on. I know you're incredibly busy. Holiday week, less days to work, more to compress. So thanks for coming on. So what's top of mind this week for you and the team over at Business Insider?
Sure. So this week, coming up on the holiday, I've been thinking a lot about the genetic tests. Actually, they're such a big part of the holiday season this past couple of years. But it's been interesting. This year it's been kind of a reckoning for a lot of these companies. The market hasn't kind of shaken out the way people thought it would. Companies in the space have kind of expected this insane growth. And obviously it's still a super popular thing and people are still looking at it, but it hasn't grown the way people expected it to. So I had this piece kind of yesterday about, what is kind of how these companies are thinking about it. So I talked to 23andMe, their CEO, Ann Wojcicki, and we talked a lot about how she's thinking about what comes next and what a world looks like if she has to think about things other than selling you a kit that you fit into. And talk to Ancestry about it too. They're going into health testing, which could prove to keep their market growing. But it'll be interesting to see, and I'm going to be curious to see how many people end up picking these up with all the privacy concerns and kind of questions about where their data goes that are lingering.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously a big issue, but I mean, to your point, I mean, the popularity and the data that you can provide to an individual and who can then take it to their primary healthcare provider and, look into potential, genetic ailments that they could have in the future. I got to think that that's really powerful technology, and I think it's just maybe it's like anything else. You kind of run the gamut. You look at Netflix. I mean, they have tens of millions of subscribers. How many more can they possibly achieve? And so maybe it's time to kind of diversify and look in a different direction on how to use this technology in other ways.
Right. Yeah. And that's been the tricky thing. It seems like maybe we're tapped out when it comes to thinking about people who are curious about their ancestry. Maybe, everyone who's been like, oh, I should figure out more about my family history has taken the test. And there's been about, if you look at Ancestry has about 15 million users and 23andMe has about 10 million. That's over a lifetime. It's not like just in 2019. But that's still a sizable chunk, given there's probably a lot of crossover, people like me who've taken both. So it's interesting. Maybe that part's tapped out, but yeah, the tricky thing is going to be figuring out how to get the health components to be, useful in a lot of ways. Like if I bring in my results from my tests to a doctor, they're not going to be able to do much with it unless I do a test that they kind of prescribe me, or if, we learn a lot more about, okay, so you have this mutation, let's use this drug to treat it or prevent, you from progressing along the disease path. We don't really have a ton of spots where that happens. Most of those have been in the cancer space for pretty advanced cancers. So it'll be really interesting. We're still probably about like 5 to 10 years away from that world, and we have been for a while. So yeah. It'll take a minute, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, let's hope. Let's keep our fingers crossed that there'll be some additional advances and people will be able to, there'll be some crossover. Because to your point, I mean, if your healthcare provider typically has to order the tests, you're right. You can't use 23andMe or Ancestry and hand that over to your healthcare provider. But I got to think the technology is leverageable. So I guess we'll wait and see on that. So I think you also wanted to talk about Google, and we talked about this I think last week in the Ascension Health data. What's your take on it?
Sure. So we had a chance to see the documents got scooped by the Journal, which is unfortunate, but still really interesting, to see kind of the inner workings of this. On the surface, from where I sit, this is something that's kind of been hitting the health system world. These hospitals are, they have massive amounts of data, and they're looking to see if maybe storing it in the cloud versus in servers on site. Could be the move. Where I think people found it a bit icky, and I talked to a lot of the chief information officers at other health systems, and we kind of talked about the reaction people had and kind of their concerns. I think what people were concerned about was the secondary use of the information. So the idea that Google and Ascension were working on this patient search tool and probably other projects to see if they could figure out ways like, okay, we have my patient record. Can we use that to train an algorithm to be better at search for the next patient that comes through the door? That kind of project, I think, turned a lot of people off, especially considering how many people had been given access to that. Because the more people who have access to your personal information, the less secure it can be. And obviously there's a lot of ways that probably the data was secure, but even still, like having someone as powerful as Google who knows so much about you, I think got people a bit nervous, which was interesting to see that conversation play out, because we've seen a couple of these other kind of partnership deals come out. A couple of different health systems have signed big deals with Microsoft and also with Google, and we didn't see the reaction to that. So it's been really interesting. I'm really curious to see if we start to see more projects like this go forward, or if they start to be a little tamped down, just because I don't want to get the same reaction.
Yeah, I mean, do you think it's having something to do with the name of the company? I mean, Google obviously is in a lot of different lines of business. I mean, Microsoft is as well, so maybe it doesn't have that.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe people have forgotten the antitrust suits of the 90s for Microsoft. Remember, they had the browser and all those kind of things that they embedded with their software. And I wonder if it's based on the name or if it's something else.
Yeah, and a lot of folks I talked to kind of hinted at that as well. It's like it's Google that we're talking about. You see like Amazon has a huge presence in the cloud space too with Amazon Web Services, but again, it's kind of under a separate name and it feels a little bit different. And yeah, when people think about Microsoft these days, they tend to think about their enterprise business, this business of selling to companies versus like a huge consumer tech giant that is in your face every day the way Google is. But it was interesting. I talked to one CIO at a health system who mentioned how, maybe these three won't win out on a lot of these cloud contracts with health systems. Maybe another cloud provider is going to, come to the front and kind of win out, which would be pretty remarkable to see if possible. These three companies, Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, mostly Amazon to a big degree, kind of own the cloud market when it comes to any industry, let alone healthcare. So as more people start to move to the cloud in healthcare, I'd be really curious to see if another one kind of showed up and kind of alleviated all the fears of the name associated with any of these tech giants.
Yeah, I think some of it's probably name, but all, name recognition, but also, I mean, from a tech point of view, maybe not a healthcare point of view, just seeing your data consolidated in the cloud under one umbrella, it's got to be a little nerve-wracking. And given all the breaches, and I, just think about, I'm looking at my iPhone as we're talking, not that I'm searching or anything, but I just have it looking at the time, and it's got the some of these phones now have the ability to read your fingerprint or to see your face, and you wonder if does that, having the data out there, render some of these security measures that we have today irrelevant, or makes them breachable. And I guess that's to be determined. But I mean, I know personally for myself, and you and I have discussed this from time to time, is I just don't want my data to fall into someone else's hands and to know anything about me intimately that I don't want to share.
Right. Yeah, and so a lot of folks I talked to too were kind of curious. One of the things that kind of happened with this is, patients didn't necessarily know that Google was taking a look at their data. And, when we think about it, like a health system in my neighborhood probably has a lot of information about me from all the visits they do, and I don't know who they're sharing it with. They have all these agreements under HIPAA, so BAAs, and kind of these structures that allow them to share data, which is ultimately, hopefully, for the better of their business and keeping things running and helping things get better for them, but I don't really know those relationships. And so some of the folks were talking about, okay, HIPAA was created in 1996, didn't really account for a world where algorithms were a thing, where companies like Google, who have so much information about you, are, in healthcare. Maybe it's time for a revamp, or maybe it's time to reassess how we're kind of treating this. Should patients have more intimate control over their data and more independence on it? And it'll be interesting to see if that happens.
Yeah, and it's becoming a big issue. I mean, California just recently passed the I always get this wrong, the Consumer Privacy Protection Act, I think CPPA. You have European unions passing the GDPR regulations around the data. So I think people are stepping up, but you're probably right. The federal government needs to probably take a look at some previous laws and make some changes there. Last topic I wanted to ask you about, and just reading your dispensed great newsletter people can sign up for online, about Juul, not the singer, but the, I guess, e-cigarette, or is that what it is? And I still like the singer. Actually saw her perform live one time, very good. But it looks like they just recently, she is very good, actually, great voice. But they actually just laid off 650 workers. What can you tell us about Juul? I mean, that's a big issue, these e-cigarette companies. I mean, that's huge right now.
It is, yeah. So it's been kind of a really a couple months of reckoning for Juul. We saw in October, a couple top execs left. They basically, in the past couple months, they've taken a lot of their e-cigarettes off the market. They've come under a ton of scrutiny, and for pretty good reason. There's been a huge spike in teen use of e-cigarettes, and these things are really addictive. So to see them kind of having some layoffs and cutting costs and kind of getting hit pretty hard, it's really interesting to watch that all happen pretty quickly. It's interesting to think about how big they got before a lot of these pressures started coming down. But yeah, it's definitely been one of those couple months where, oh man, the stuff is really starting to hit the pavement, and it's definitely going to be curious to see how the company if it can survive. We saw a huge investments go into the company from kind of cigarette makers and things like that. And there seems to be a lot of lobbying power to keep them around. But yeah, it's definitely going to be tough for them to come out of this. They're really seen as these kind of bad guys of the industry and kind of creating this market for teen e-cigarette users. But a lot of people do use them for the kind of purpose that Juul now says it has of, getting people off of cigarettes and onto ideally less harmful mechanism. It's still undetermined whether or not that's fully true, I think, from a scientific perspective. But I think as long as there's still a market for the teen users, they're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, it seems like this is under the scrutiny. It's not just Juul, but they are probably the biggest name, and maybe people are not using it for the use that they, you can't replace. I mean, you should replace cigarettes, but I mean, you can't trade one for the other and just puff on it. I was not even aware of this, although I did see people using e-cigarettes, but I have seen it more pronounced, and people still smoke, unfortunately. So there is a need to get people and wean people off of nicotine, and we have the patches and things like that, but it has proven very difficult to do. So it probably serves an important purpose, but obviously it's got to be healthy for people as well. Lydia, it's always a pleasure talking with you, and people should definitely check out the Dispensed newsletter for all the latest healthcare news each and every week. I know Lydia and the team do it. They do a great job. It comes out every Friday, right, Lydia?
It does. Hopefully I'll get mine out tomorrow ahead of the holiday. But yeah, it's a weekly newsletter.
Always a pleasure chatting with you, and thanks so much for your contribution, and we will talk to you very soon.
All right, thanks so much.
Take care. Bye. Welcome back. Now we're going to shift gears, talk a little real estate, and joining me now from Market Watch, Mr. Jacob Passy, real estate reporter. Hey, Jacob, how are you?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
I'm doing well. How was your Thanksgiving, my friend?
It was good. I did most of the cooking for my family, but everything went well. I actually finished cooking everything hours in advance, so we ate on time and everything. It was great.
And how was the cleanup? That's always the challenging part, right?
It's still an ongoing process.
Very funny. So what's top of mind this week? I know you had a break for the Thanksgiving holiday, but any thoughts about what's going on in the real estate world these days?
Yeah, so before Thanksgiving, we had a number of real estate data reports come out. Every month, the Census Bureau and the National Association of Realtors put out various reports on the state of the housing market. So there was a flurry this week, because usually they come out at the end of the month, and with kind of abbreviated week because of the Thanksgiving holiday. Mm-hmm. Got a bunch more in a short time frame. But one interesting report that came out was for pending home sales. So this is an index that the National Association of Realtors puts together, and it basically tracks contract signings. So it tracks when people sign, the contract to buy a home, but the sale has not actually closed yet. Obviously, if those who bought homes know, you sign it, and there's usually a lag time while things get processed and everything is finalized before the closing actually happens. So this is an interesting data point because it can show, it's a leading indicator rather than most of the reports that come out are, are looking at what has already happened, but
right.
Because this captures contract signings, not closings, like other real estate measures, it's an interesting data point to look at because it can kind of give us a hint as to what to expect in the months to come. So, so the report that came out this week was for October's pending home sales figures. So those sales would probably close this month in November, or if you're listening a few days from now, I guess last month, because December is just around the corner.
Right.
We're recording this on Friday, obviously. So what was interesting was it showed that pending home sales fell in October, and why that's important to consider is a couple of factors. One, for the past few months, the real estate market's been doing really well because of the low interest rates everyone's been seeing out there. It's made it really easy to refinance, so tons of people have been refinancing. But what didn't necessarily happen was, it did lead to a slight increase in, home sales activity and whatnot, but it didn't really lead to the kind of boom that some people were expecting, because rates basically went, in like September, went down basically as low as they've been since the financial crisis. I mean, I think there was a couple, there was like a year where they were lower, but, really these were the lowest rates we've, basically that, have ever been seen in the United States for mortgages. And so the fact that didn't lead to a boost in home buying activity, as much of a boost in home buying activity, was, kind of interesting. And then on top of that, the rates started creeping up again in October, and just, index showed that, pending sales dropped. So, that suggested, first of all, that, buyers are sensitive to mortgage rates. Once mortgage rates started coming up a little bit in October, you saw sales activity fall. And all this data is seasonally adjusted, so it's taking into account the fact that fewer people buy homes in October normally anyway, or sign home purchases in October anyway. But the other point that I thought was very interesting that the National Association of Realtors basically made was they said the biggest issue is there are just not any homes for sale, really. This has been an ongoing thing, and I think you and I have talked about it before, that inventory is so low. There are so few homes on sale right now across the country. And, oftentimes when we talk about that, we talk about it from an affordability perspective. It just makes it much more expensive to buy a home because, the home seller can, raise the price higher because the demand is there to buy. And if there's nothing else on the market, people will scoop up whatever they can get, regardless of the price to some extent. And obviously that's priced a lot of people out of the market. And, for those who can stay in the market, it's meant that they've, paid more than they might have otherwise for, the same home. But I thought it was interesting, this point that basically not only, that basically made this, it's kind of showed that, not only is the lack of homes causing affordability issues, but there's an extent to which there are just so few homes for sale right now that people that home sales figures are going down because people can't just find anything to buy. And I thought that was just kind of an interesting point and something to keep in mind because, there's been a lot of talk about, the home builders have been saying that they're going to, increase the construction activity and build more homes and all that. And so, a data point like this, which shows that pending sales have dropped in October, which means that we can probably expect, home sales to have actually fallen once, the November figures come in when the sales close. That will kind of give us an indication that, the supply issue is going to be an issue for some time to come.
Mm-hmm.
That all being said, and I'm doing some reporting on it right now, but there was a big article in the Wall Street Journal this week that I want to mention about the so-called silver wave or silver tsunami. And it was basically Zillow put out this report kind of showing this creeping issue of the fact that, the baby boomer generation is, basically, a lot of people are obviously aging in place and choosing to not sell their homes and not downsize as, people did in the past. But, nevertheless, there are still a lot of baby boomers who are going to be, moving out of homes in the years to come. And then on a more kind of morbid note, a lot of baby boomers are going to start dying soon. And especially if they're folks who chose to age in place, those homes are going to come on the market. And so this report kind of went into how, the millions of homes are going to come up for sale in the next couple decades as baby boomers, pass away. And it's going to create, in some parts of the country, it's going to create this massive influx of homes on the market as baby boomers die and, Gen Xers and millennials and Gen Zers don't necessarily want to live in those same areas. This is going to be a big issue in like the Sun Belt states like Florida and Arizona that see large numbers of retirees, but you're not seeing the same, gravitation on the part of, Gen Xers and millennials to those areas. So, in some of these cities in, Arizona and Florida, that are really popular with, the 60-plus crowd, there might be a glut of homes on the market in the next couple decades that just don't go filled because, unless millennials, and Gen Xers, see deals because of the massive influx. But just kind of thought that was interesting because it's a tough question, if you're, a real estate developer or whatever, you develop a community now, if 10 years from now, there might be this massive influx of homes because of, retirees moving or folks dying and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that creates elasticity. And I guess the balancing act is, we clearly need, I know you've talked about on the program, Silicon Valley, San Francisco. I mean, there are other geographical areas where the price of housing is just outrageous. And people can't
Right.
afford if they have to move in, they are, the rents are outrageous. They have to move in with like 3 or 4 other people and basically share a room. And obviously there is a need for more supply. But
Right.
it sounds as though that supply is not necessarily coming, at least in the short term, because home builders are holding off. And I really hadn't thought about, Jacob, the transfer. Always hear about the baby boomers and the transfer of wealth, right, from one generation to the next,
Hmm.
and people unfortunately dying off and willing their estates. But I hadn't really contemplated the additional elasticity that happens from those homes. But you bring up another great point, which is geographically, people may not want to relocate to Florida, or they may not want to go. They may want to travel the globe. They may want to go somewhere else. And I
Right.
think that brings
Right.
up really an interesting point. I mean, any sense for how, societally that would impact us? I mean, you have all these glut of homes that are on the market, can't be sold. When these
Yeah.
people,
Well,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I no. I wanted to just say, I think you raise a great point. From the transfer of wealth perspective, if you're, retired parent, and you're thinking, well, I have this, I'm sitting on this home, and that will be the bulk of the inheritance I leave for my kids. Well, you might want to start considering, yeah, that might be the bulk of the inheritance you leave for your kids, but will your home really be worth that same amount when the time comes that you pass away? If you're passing away and all your neighbors are also passing away, all of these home values may go down as a result. If there's, a massive, number of homes on the market, it might be harder to sell, and like I said before, people don't necessarily want to move to these areas. So I think some of what we're seeing from like a societal perspective is these cities that have for years, kind of advertised themselves as, retiree meccas, are kind of having to think about rebranding themselves and trying to market themselves to a younger demographic. That millennials, and Gen Xers aren't quite at retirement age yet, but they're different generations. They value different things. A lot of these communities were set up in a specific way to cater to the desires of baby boomers. You saw a lot of these cities really just get completely developed in the past 50 years. It was kind of with this generation in mind and the generations preceding it in mind. The silent generation and everything. And so that model doesn't necessarily carry over to today's generations that value things somewhat differently. And there's a lot of talk all the time about how, millennials especially, prefer to live in more urban areas, and things like that, and prefer diversity, diverse communities, lots of, you want to live in a neighborhood where there's great food from different cultures and things like that. And so those values, don't necessarily translate to some of these communities set up to be kind of just, retirement communities. They're not, established in the same way, and they're kind of artificially designed. And so it's about, how do you shift gears? I mean, is it a matter of, trying to attract major employers to these, to these cities? Some of these cities haven't had to worry about that too much because they've got this kind of captive audience of retirees that kind of pay taxes and live there and, whatnot. But maybe it's a matter of, getting, a big company to set up shop in that town, or whenever you see, Apple just, Apple opening new offices, Amazon, creating their second headquarters in Northern Virginia. A lot of companies are looking to expand their corporate footprint in terms of, office space. So maybe some of these cities can, pivot in that direction. It's kind of an open-ended question.
Yeah.
And there also is the extent to which, we're talking about this massive glut, but and part of the concern is just how large the baby boomer generation is. It is so much larger than Gen X. Millennials are quite big. The millennial generation is quite large as well, but there's going to be kind of that period of when Gen X retires where there's going to be far fewer of them than there were baby boomers. And so that is, another factor here is, there's an extent to which just the size of the retiree population from Gen X is going to, be much smaller than the retiree generation of baby boomers. And that also, ultimately leads to lower demand. And then there's also the factor that, I'm sure you hear about this all the time. Fewer people are, approaching retirement the ways that their parents did.
Yep.
Fewer people are finding it possible to retire at 65. And and things like that. And so, if you can't retire, if you got to keep working, are you really going to move to, Phoenix, Arizona? Probably not if your job won't let you. So that's another factor in all of this.
Yeah.
As people find it harder to retire, that's going to affect these, cities and towns across the country that have, designed themselves and marketed themselves as retirement destinations. So definitely an interesting factor. And also, while I'm talking about this, I'll put a plug in. I don't know if Allie's ever mentioned it, but MarketWatch has this cool tool that our colleagues developed, a retirement tool where you can plug in all your desires for your retirement, and it pops up a list of the best cities for you to retire to. So you can kind of say, I want to live in this size city near the water, and I want there to be good museums in the area, and then it'll give you like a list of cities that. So maybe it's all about for these cities to figure out who they should cater to and what does set them apart from the other retirement destinations.
Yeah.
Retiring to Arizona and Florida both have warm weather, but Arizona is a much different kind of environment than Florida is in a lot of ways as well. So
Yeah, I think you bring up some things that I didn't even contemplate, and you're right. These cities are going to have to rebrand, and for many whose homes are their largest asset, what do? Do you take out a home equity loan and begin the drawdown that way if you're not going to be able to move the home? Do you contemplate moving in advance of retirement so that you get you do your best to try to sell the house now? Jacob, I think there's a lot of people to think about, and I guess we're just going to have to see how it all kind of plays itself out. Really appreciate you coming on the program and enlightening us about this. I had not even thought about that. So enjoy the rest of your week, and we will talk to you again next week. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Welcome back, and now we're going to welcome back to the program. She took a little bit of some time off, Miss Alessandra Melito. She is the retirement reporter for MarketWatch. Allie, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. It's been a while.
It has been a while, but I know you prepared articles while you were away. You went. You're away on a honeymoon, so congratulations to you and your significant other. But you had prepared some articles, and so I know you were very busy leading up to your event. So thanks for making some time for us. So what's top of mind this week? You're back in the fold. You felt compelled to come back and help Americans save. So what's top of mind this week?
Yeah, so as always, my goal is to get people to save for retirement or think about retirement or just maybe make one little change in their personal finances so that they save a little bit more for their futures. And while I was away, So I wrote a few stories this week, but something that I was really excited about was a story that ran while I was away. So it was part of the special section that MarketWatch has called Best New Ideas, and this particular one was about gifts that pay off. And my story in particular was about giving the gift of a retirement coach. And I thought that was a really fun piece because that's something that is very proactive, and it's a very productive gift. And for people of all ages. So there are obviously financial advisors who talk to you about your retirement prospects or your retirement if you are in retirement. But then there's another subset of advisors, not technically financial advisors, who focus on the life events. And they will talk to you more about your goals for retirement, and then you can work with them as well as a financial advisor, or they might work with each other to help you realize those goals. So I spoke with a couple of people, some of whom had received this as a gift, and some people who are retirement coaches and have worked with people who were given this as a gift, and they all say that it's an interesting choice for a holiday gift because it's something that will it's not necessarily you don't unwrap it and you're like, wow, a retirement coach, but it's something that the giftees, they might even not realize how valuable it is for them. And they might not have asked themselves questions that the retirement coach would ask them. So then they open their eyes and as they're like going to a new year about what they want and how they can accomplish it. And I've spoke with people who say like family members might give it to, like family members or spouses might give it to somebody, like saying you gotta get your life together, and other people might be like, well, it really benefited me, so I think it'll benefit you. And it's a very different gift, so that's why I liked it so much.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It's almost like, you remember, you probably don't remember, but savings bonds. You used to give savings bonds as birthday gifts, or as like bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, significant gifts, and that didn't really have didn't really resonate. If you were a younger person, you wanted like a toy or whatever. But I really like this idea of a retirement coach, and that's something that you can see tangible results in your lifestyle, and with your balances if you have that person. Any sense, Allie, for how does this compare cost-wise? Maybe not in dollars per se, but how does this compare cost-wise to hiring a financial advisor? Because obviously hiring another person to do this, there's cost to it, isn't it? No one volunteers to do this for free.
So it really depends on the type of like how you want to work it. So some people might gift sessions, which would be a couple $100, depending on the retirement coach and their experience and where they are and all that stuff. But you would more likely gift like a session or two, which would run you a couple $100 at least. Then there are also coach programs, which is like it's like numerous sessions, kind of like an ongoing thing, as opposed to like one or two meetings. How it compares to financial advisors, I mean, I guess it depends. Some financial advisors, there are obviously those that charge based on like assets under management. Then there are some that are more focused on, like they might do something hourly too, if it's with like a younger person, or a family or friend of one of their current clients. But yeah, I would say like a couple $100. It's an expensive gift, but it's something like if you have a spouse, for example, and maybe you're really into the numbers and the finances and the retirement planning and all that stuff, but your spouse isn't, and maybe your spouse isn't into it because he or she hasn't really thought about what they want to do in retirement. That would be like that's an example where this gift could really pay off, because then it gets you both on the same page, or maybe like a parent or something like that. But yeah, it is an expensive gift, so you have to make sure that the other person actually wants it or uses it.
Yeah, is it in your sense, is the retirement coach someone who would be a peer, or would they be someone who is a bit older and has gone through the experience? Like if I'm 47, would I hire a retirement coach who has already retired or is a little bit older than me, who would be able to, like, do you have a sense for what that would look like?
It depends on the person. So it's kind of like when you find a financial advisor, you really have to do your own, you have to see who works best for you. Like some people might feel more comfortable with a financial advisor who is older than them, because then they feel like they have more experience. While some people might feel more comfortable if they have somebody who's their age, because then they can understand where they are in life. Like, if I'm 35 and I have a new family and I'm looking to buy a house or something like that, if I have a financial advisor who's also in their 30s, maybe they understand the feeling that I had because they're living it too in that moment. Sure. So there are so many different types of retirement coaches, like, across the country, and they all have different expertise. Like some, might be more focused on like the, if you want to retire to the beach and do volunteer work, there might be a retirement coach who focuses on volunteer work. So it's one of those, like, it depends scenarios. Yep. I, as a reporter, understand how infuriating that answer is, but it's a really case by case situation.
Yeah, I don't think it's infuriating at all, because I think that much like retirement in general or life decisions, it's individual. It's to the individual, right? And so you got to find the right person that fits with you. But I could definitely see a market for this, because it's like navigating anything in life can be a challenge, and why not try to leverage the experiences of people whether it's buying a home, whether it's taking out student loan, right? I mean, that's one of the biggest significant financial pieces of debt that people can have. You might need someone to help you navigate that. And I think navigating retirement, why not learn from somebody who has an idea or who might be able to give you the outsider's perspective. You can't always have 360 degrees around you to pick up what's going on. And I think having someone to coach you and say, well, did you think about this? Did you think about this? Do you really want to live in the desert outside the city because you may not have access to a hospital? All those kind of things. And I think that person can really be contemplative and help you think about these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And retirement coaches are also, they're different than financial advisors because they don't always focus on the finances.
Yep.
Like I ask them, you kind of have to do it a little bit, right? Because you can't make these people go on chasing goals that they physically, they financially can't afford. But at the same time, you want to be more aspirational, and people should be able to, hope for the best and try saving for those kinds of goals and see how they can accomplish those goals, whether it be volunteer work or whether it be spending more time with family, but also traveling more. There are so many moving parts, and I think sometimes, financial advisors, they do a really good job of helping you plan, but they are also trying to focus on the finances, whereas these retirement coaches are more okay, well, if you do want to do part-time work in retirement, just occasional consulting or something like that, have you thought about what your role would even look like or what your schedule would look like, and what does that mean for the other things that you want to do? And when I spoke to the person who has a retirement coach, he said the benefit for me was that they were asking me questions that I would not have asked myself because, one, I didn't think of them, or two, I was afraid to ask myself. So it's just, a different perspective on retirement. And since that's such a big aspect of your life and such a large chapter, it's good to, think of all these questions that you might not ask yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Great story. People can certainly check that out on Allie. You can search for Allie and look at the Market Watch website. It's a special edition, special section that you all have, right?
Yep, it's called Gifts That Pay Off.
Gifts That Pay Off, Allie Melito. Allie, always great talking to you. So glad you're back. I'm glad you had a great time in your travels, and look forward to hearing more from you during the rest of the year. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we will talk soon.
Awesome, thank you.
Welcome back, and what Thanksgiving holiday would be complete without a discussion with the Legal Eagles, who I can only imagine what their Thanksgiving holidays are like. Joining me on the line, David Levine, Kevin Walsh, both principals from Groom Law. Gentlemen, happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. We appreciate being here.
Well, that's great. So what is top of mind? What are we talking about this week? I mean, are you giving thanks for anything? What did you give thanks for? What are you thankful for? Who wants to take that?
This week we're going to talk about, what we're thankful for. But to me, before I get into the substance, I'm just glad that we're the legal eagles, not the legal turkeys. In late November, it's better to be an eagle than a turkey.
That's absolutely true.
So I guess the thing that I'm most thankful for with in the benefit space this year is the electronic delivery proposal. It's been kind of low-hanging fruit, and in October, the DOL released a proposal which is essentially, if it's finalized, designed to move the default from kind of paper and just lots of printing, lots of mailing to electronic, so that you're able to get your account statements. You're easy to kind of stay in touch with your plan digitally. And that shift to digital default is something that I'm thankful for and I'm looking forward to next year. David, is there anything you're thankful for?
What am I thankful for at this point? I am thankful for the Secure Act passing.
For what, the House?
No, that was a joke. That was for you, Jeff.
Thank you.
I am. If you ask what I am thankful for at this very moment, I think for me, I share a lot of what Kevin has, so he took my thunder. So thank you, Kevin. Beyond that, though,
I've got a good one next. I mean, I've stockpiled one more, so I'm just hoping you don't pick it.
Well, for me, I am thankful that we are actually talking about something different these days. I do like the pivot that we've been starting to make, not just to the accumulation phase of retirement, but to decumulation. I'm not going to talk about lifetime income disclosures or anything insecure, but I mean, I'm thankful that in the past year you've really seen a pivot towards saying what is important and how do people actually not outlive their retirement savings. Because we've spent so much on the accumulation phase, it's nice to talk about decumulation. That sounds so sterile, but it's true, because I think that we need to think not of how we save, but how do we spend down, especially with the boomer generation retiring at this point.
Love it.
I think that's a great thing to be thankful for, David. I think it's a combination of kind of seeing the shift in the eyes of regulators in the academic community, but also seeing a little bit of innovation going on right now in product design. But what I'm thankful for is kind of how the benefits world is making its case, that it needs to use privacy, that it needs to use information in a way different than what you see from kind of big data and Google and whatnot. And so what I'm thankful for essentially is that California, with their big privacy law going online next year, has recognized that that plans are a unique situation, and that there needs to be kind of special rules that allow for the continued development of new and innovative products in the retirement space, new and innovative services in the retirement space, and that they're kind of providing some relief from some of the provisions of the CCPA that would have interfered with kind of innovative plan design.
That was good. I like
David,
that one. I like that one. David, you got one more?
Let's see if I got one more. Well, I'm going to wind on something a little more perky and a little bit more humorous. I am thankful for Jeff Snyder and having us on the Morning Pulse, because to be realistic, we appreciate that you include us every week, Jeff, and we can't say thank you enough. And that part is really true.
I appreciate that.
To everybody,
David,
David, I was going to say,
you couldn't find a fourth benefit-related thing to be thankful for this year. We had to go right to thank Jeff as the fourth.
Actually,
come up with two each.
I've got more, but it's more interesting. Also, Kevin, to be perfectly honest with you, my fourth one could have been, I am thankful that Kevin and I do not need to record this on Friday together and we get a break. But I didn't think that was as nice, because actually that makes me sad, so I'm not going to go there.
Well, I think I am thankful for each of you and your contribution, and I think the audience is a lot better off to hear what's going on in the retirement space from the legal eagles, and I would agree, and I am hopeful, David, that we get some, and Kevin, that we get some level of passage of some aspect of the Secure Act within the next 24 months. So I am crossing my fingers, but I appreciate the kind words. And Kevin, I want to tell you that I'm thankful that we're doing something about missing participants.
Well, hopefully we do more about missing participants. I think next week we'll talk a little bit more about DOL's enforcement stats for 2019, which signal that missing participants has been a really high priority. But, this week I'm giving thanks. Next week I'll go back to complaining.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, always a pleasure talking with you. I hope you have a great weekend, and thanks for doing this a bit early. So I guess the joke's up for everyone. We were recording this before Thanksgiving, but just so we don't have to do it on a Friday. But I appreciate the guys and gals of the program contributing and making this a much better show week to week. So, gentlemen, enjoy your holiday, and we will talk to you all next week.
Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
I hope everyone enjoyed their Thanksgiving. Bye.
Well, that wraps up this episode of BRN Sunday Podcast. I'm Jeff Snyder. Thanks so much for joining us this week. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving, great holiday. Maybe you got out there and enjoyed a little shopping. Maybe you didn't. But hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. And we'll see you again right back here next week on the BRN Sunday Podcast. Take care.